Introduction. Welcome. Allow yourself to settle into comfort, to slow your breath, and to let the day fall gently behind you. Tonight, we are traveling across time and space to a land both distant and enduring, Imperial China. When we think of China's past, it is easy to picture great walls stretching over mountains, glittering palaces, or scholars writing poetry by lamplight. Yet beneath all of that splendor lived the countless millions who sustained the empire, the peasants. Their names were not recorded in history books, yet their hands shaped the land, their labor fed dynasties, and their endurance held the empire together. Over the course of this story, we will step quietly into their lives. We will walk through fields and villages, hear the rhythm of planting and harvest, and feel the constant presence of rivers and weather that could nourish or destroy. We will glimpse the weight of taxes and labor demanded by emperors, and we will drift into the mysteries of tombs and relics buried beneath the soil. We will meet the scholar officials whose lives of refinement contrasted so greatly with the peasants. And we will see the immense gap between a farmer's mud brick home and the golden halls of the court. Our journey will unfold in 10 parts, each one a gentle step deeper into that world. The goal is not excitement, but calm reflection, a measured story to accompany you as you rest, a reminder that history is both vast and human, shaped as much by ordinary endurance as by extraordinary ambition. So close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the rustle of bamboo in the wind, the steady splash of water in a rice paddy, and the soft glow of lanterns in a distant village. Let us begin. Segment 1. Village farming routines. Imagine waking in a simple home of packed earth. The walls are plain, the roof thatched, the floor bare. A clay stove warms the morning meal, a thin porridge of rice or millet, steam rising into the cool air. Outside, the village is stirring. Chickens cluck softly, a dog barks, and the muffled sounds of neighbors preparing for the fields drift through the mist. Life begins early because the fields cannot wait. The men gather tools, wooden plows, hoes, baskets. A water buffalo shifts its weight heavily, ready to pull through wet earth. Women prepare food to bring into the fields, while children help where they can, their bare feet muddy before the sun has fully risen. The rice paddy is a mirror of water and sky. Rows of green shoots stretch in every direction, planted by hand, each one pressed carefully into the soil. In drier regions, fields of wheat or millet replace the paddies. But the work is no less demanding. The soil must be tilled, weeds removed, harvests reaped with simple sickles. Meals are plain, bowls of rice, perhaps flavored with pickled vegetables or a bit of fish. Meat is rare, reserved for festivals or sacrifices. Salt and soy sauce bring sharpness to otherwise bland fare. Tea, when it can be afforded, warms the body and soothes the spirit. But water drawn from wells or rivers is the everyday drink. Life is communal. Neighbors share tools and labor, especially during planting and harvest, when one family's survival depends on the strength of many hands. Disputes are inevitable, over land, over water rights, over debts, yet cooperation is essential. The village is not just a home, but a fragile web of survival. As evening falls, the air is heavy with the smell of wood smoke. Families gather to eat, to mend clothing, to weave baskets. Children listen to stories told by grandparents, tales of spirits in the forest, of distant emperors, of ancestors whose names are remembered only in whispered prayers. Lanterns flicker, the fields fall quiet, and the cycle of labor pauses only for sleep. This was the rhythm of peasant life. Sunrise to sunset, season to season. Predictable, exhausting, yet also steady. A pattern that endured for centuries, shaping not just individuals, but the very character of China itself. Segment 2. Floods, famine, and the mercy of nature. For all the constancy of routine, peasants lived at the mercy of nature. The rivers that nourished their fields could just as easily destroy them. Chief among these was the Yellow River, known both as the cradle of Chinese civilization and as China's sorrow. When the river flowed gently, it left behind fertile soil, rich with silt that made crops flourish. Villages thrived, granaries filled, and families looked ahead with relief. But when the river rose too high, when its banks gave way, the result was devastation. Fields vanished under rushing water, homes dissolved in mud, and entire villages were swept away. Imagine the sound of rain that does not stop. The river swells, the air thick with dampness, and the ground beneath your feet trembles with the weight of water. Families rush to save what they can, baskets of grain, a few tools, perhaps a child carried on a shoulder. But the force of the flood is overwhelming. Even without floods, famine lurked. A dry season could wither crops before they ripened. Locust swarms could strip fields bare in days. Disease followed hunger, spreading quickly through weakened bodies. For peasants, each year carried not only the promise of harvest, but also the fear that nature might turn against them. Rituals and offerings sought to appease the heavens. Villagers prayed to river gods and ancestors, hoping for balance, not too much rain, not too little. But the truth was always the same. Their survival depended on forces beyond their control. The imperial state knew this too. Officials built dikes, canals, and irrigation systems, drawing labor from the very peasants they sought to protect. Sometimes these works succeeded, bringing stability to regions long plagued by disaster. Other times they failed, and the blame fell not on the heavens, but on those tasked with maintaining them. Imagine, then, a peasant family watching the river in anxious silence, eyes on the waterline as it creeps higher. The harvest is uncertain, the taxes still due, and the next season always approaching. Life is a negotiation between land and sky, between effort and fate, between what can be controlled and what cannot. This was the constant tension of peasant life. Endurance, yes, but also fragility. A single storm, a single drought, could undo years of labor, reminding them that while their hands tilled the soil, their survival rested in forces far greater. Segment 2. Qin Shi Huang's reign. From the humble rhythm of the village, we now turn to the figure whose name still echoes through history, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His reign, though brief, reshaped the land in ways that touched every peasant's life. Through taxes, through labor, and through the centralization of power that bound the empire together. Imagine the year 221 BCE, after centuries of warring states, each ruled by rival kings and generals, Qin Shi Huang emerged victorious. With unyielding ambition, he united the fractured territories into a single empire, declaring himself the first emperor. For those who lived in small villages, the names of kings and dynasties might once have felt distant. But under Qin Shi Huang, the reach of the state pressed closer than ever. He standardized weights and measures, ensuring that trade and taxation were uniform. He unified the written script so that across regions, officials could communicate more easily. Even the width of cart axles was made consistent, so roads could be traveled smoothly across the empire. These reforms were meant to bring order, but they also reminded peasants that they lived under a power larger than their village, larger even than their province. The emperor was ambitious in projects. The building of roads and canals linked distant lands, allowing soldiers and goods to move quickly. For peasants, this often meant forced labor, weeks or months taken from their families to dig, carry, and build, under the watchful eyes of overseers. Taxes too were heavy, not only in grain but also in the form of manpower. Most famously, Qin Shi Huang ordered the linking of existing walls into the early form of what we now call the Great Wall. For the peasants pressed into this task, the work was grueling. Imagine carrying stones under a blazing sun, climbing steep slopes with little food or rest. Many died, their bodies left near the very wall they were forced to construct. For them, the emperor's dream of security meant exhaustion and sacrifice. The emperor himself was a figure of awe and fear. He sought not only to rule, but to endure beyond the natural span of life. Obsessed with immortality, he sent expeditions to seek elixirs and herbs, hoping to conquer death itself. Yet the very potions he consumed, heavy with mercury, may have hastened his decline. And so, even as villages planted rice and millet, even as families tended hearths and fields, the shadow of Qin Shi Huang stretched over them. Their crops supported his armies. Their labor built his walls and palaces. Their lives were measured not only by the cycles of nature, but by the decrees of an emperor whose face they would never see. Imagine the contrast. A quiet farmer bending low in a paddy, hands in the mud, while far away in the capital, the first emperor plotted ways to bind an empire of millions. To the peasant, the emperor was distant, almost mythic. Yet his hand was felt in every tax collected, every official dispatched, every summons to labor that pulled men from their homes. When Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE, he left behind both a unified state and deep resentment. The empire he forged collapsed into rebellion soon after, yet the patterns he imposed, standardization, centralization, and the vision of one ruler over all, would echo through China's dynasties for centuries to come. And so, the peasant's life was never truly his own. The land, the harvest, even his laboring body, were tied not only to his family and village, but to the vast ambitions of rulers who demanded much while offering little in return. Segment 3. The Terracotta Army Mysteries. When Qin Shi Huang passed from this world, he did not go alone. Beneath the earth, near his capital at Xianyang, he left behind one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever uncovered, the Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-size soldiers guarding his tomb. Imagine walking into a vast pit, the roof long since collapsed, sunlight spilling down upon rows of silent figures. Their faces are calm, their stances steady, their armor detailed in clay. Each one seems alive, though they have stood unmoving for more than 2,000 years. This was no simple burial. It was a city beneath the ground, a world crafted to accompany the emperor into eternity. The figures were first discovered in 1974, when farmers digging a well struck fragments of clay. What began as a small find soon revealed itself to be immense. Thousands of soldiers, archers, infantry, charioteers, even generals stood arranged in formation, ready to march into the afterlife. Horses and chariots too were sculpted, complete with intricate harnesses and wheels. Each face is unique. Some bear stern expressions, others softer. Their hairstyles differ, their armor shows details suited to rank. Archaeologists believe that the craftsmen modeled them after real soldiers, capturing individuality even in mass production. Imagine the labor this required. Sculptors, painters, and artisans working under imperial orders, knowing their creations would never again see the light of day. Yet the Terracotta Army is only part of the tomb complex. Ancient texts suggest that the emperor's mausoleum contained rivers of mercury to represent flowing water, mountains of bronze, and a palace beneath the earth mirroring the one above. Much of the central tomb remains unexcavated, out of concern that opening it might destroy fragile artifacts or release toxins sealed within. The mystery endures, resting quietly beneath layers of soil. For the peasants who built it, the project was monumental. Laborers dug, hauled, and sculpted, their hands shaping clay into the forms of warriors. Many may never have returned home, for ancient records tell of workers who were buried within the tomb itself, ensuring its secrets remained hidden. The Terracotta Army is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. It speaks of an emperor's fear of death, his desire to control even the afterlife, and the scale of power that could command entire populations to labor for years on a single vision. As you picture the rows of clay soldiers now, imagine the silence of the underground chambers. Dust settles softly, light glances across weathered features, and the figures stand watch as they have for millennia. The living world has changed countless times since they were made, but they remain unmoving, eternal guardians of a ruler who sought immortality. The mystery is not only in their construction, but in what lies still untouched. Beneath the mound that marks the emperor's resting place, secrets slumber, waiting for a day when technology may reveal them without harm. Until then, the Terracotta Army stands as both a discovery and a reminder of ambition without end, of labor without choice, and of the fragile line between memory and forgetting. Segment 3. Tax collectors and burdens of the state. Even when harvests were poor, the empire's demands did not lessen. For the peasant, survival meant not only pleasing the earth and sky, but also meeting the expectations of the state. Imagine the arrival of a tax collector in a quiet village. His robes are more refined than those of the farmers, his voice sharp, his scrolls marked with quotas. He doesn't come alone. Attendants and guards ensure compliance. The villagers gather nervously, carrying baskets of grain, bundles of straw, or coins of copper if they are fortunate. Taxes came in many forms. Grain was the most common. A portion of the harvest surrendered to the state. Corvée labor was another. Days, weeks, or even months spent digging canals, repairing roads, or hauling stone for imperial projects. Military service, too, pulled men from their families, leaving fields untended while they marched under banners not their own. There was no pause for disaster. Even if the river flooded or drought left fields barren, taxes remained due. Families might borrow from neighbors or fall into debt with local moneylenders, pledging future harvests or even land itself as repayment. The cycle deepened with each bad year, binding peasants ever more tightly to both landlords and the state. Imagine the quiet resentment that followed. A farmer watches his family ration food while seeing his best grain carried away. He shoulders a plow all year, yet the benefit flows upward, away from his home, into granaries and treasuries he will never see. To resist openly was dangerous, but murmurs spread, and sometimes whole villages fled rather than face unbearable demands. For the empire, taxes were lifeblood. They fed armies, funded palaces, and maintained the great machine of governance. For the peasant, they were a constant reminder that labor was never fully their own. Even in the most isolated hamlet, the hand of the emperor could be felt, not in his presence, but in the weight of obligations delivered by officials. This was another rhythm of life, alongside the planting of fields, the cycle of collection, of giving up what little could be spared, of enduring the presence of authority that appeared when least welcome. For the peasants, taxes were as certain as the seasons, as unyielding as the soil beneath their feet. Segment 4. Qin Shi Huang's reign. From the tax collector's scrolls, we step further into the shadow of the emperor himself, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His reign, though short, reshaped the landscape of power and left marks that peasants could not ignore. In 221 BCE, he unified the warring states into a single empire. For the first time, China was bound under one ruler, one law, one vision of order. To accomplish this, Qin Shi Huang imposed sweeping changes. He standardized weights and measures so that a bushel of grain meant the same in every province. He unified the written script, making communication clear across regions. Even the width of cart axles was set, so that roads could be used by all without difficulty. For the peasant, these reforms were invisible, yet ever present. Trade became more predictable, taxes more consistent, and officials more precise in their records. Yet with unification came heavier burdens. The emperor was ambitious in his building. He ordered vast networks of roads and canals. He commanded that walls along the northern frontier be joined into what became the early form of the Great Wall. To peasants, this meant endless summons for corvée labor. Men were marched from their villages, set to dig, haul, and carry until exhaustion claimed them. Many never returned. Imagine being pulled from your fields during planting season, leaving behind your family, knowing that your absence might doom their harvest. The work itself was crushing. Stones lifted by hand, trenches carved through earth, watchtowers raised on windswept ridges. The empire grew strong, but it was carried on the backs of those least able to bear it. Qin Shi Huang himself was both revered and feared. Tales spread of his search for immortality. Alchemists and explorers sent in search of elixirs, his court filled with strange potions and rituals. He sought to conquer death just as he had conquered the warring states. Yet for peasants, his ambitions meant only more taxes, more labor, and more distance between their lives and his. When he died in 210 BCE, buried in a tomb of unimaginable scale, rebellion quickly followed. His dynasty collapsed within a few short years, yet the idea of a unified China endured. Future dynasties would follow his model, ruling with the same centralized authority, drawing their strength again and again from the labor of the people. For the farmer in the fields, Qin Shi Huang was a distant figure, never seen but always felt. His decrees reached into their homes through taxes, through labor demands, through the heavy hand of officials. And while his dream of immortality failed, his presence remained in the shape of the empire itself. An empire built on the endurance of those who had no choice but to obey. Segment 5. The Rise of the Han Dynasty. From the strict hand of Qin Shi Huang, the story of China moved into the era of the Han Dynasty, a period remembered for stability, culture, and expansion. For peasants, however, the changes were less about glory and more about endurance, as new rulers brought both relief and new burdens. After the Qin collapsed, rebellion swept the land. Out of this turmoil rose Liu Bang, who became Emperor Gaozu of Han in 202 BCE. Unlike Qin Shi Huang, he was not born to nobility. His rise from peasant origins offered hope that ordinary men could achieve greatness. Yet once on the throne, he too relied on the same taxes and labor that had sustained the Qin. Under the Han, systems of governance grew more sophisticated. Laws were softened compared to Qin's severity, but obligations remained. Peasants still paid grain taxes, still gave labor, still faced the risk of being conscripted into the army. For some, this meant campaigns along the frontiers, where nomadic raids threatened villages. For others, it meant working on canals that carried water to fields, or roads that carried soldiers and merchants across the empire. Yet the Han also brought prosperity. Silk production flourished, and trade extended westward along the beginnings of what would later be called the Silk Road. Villages found new markets for their goods, and some peasants became more secure. The state, following Confucian ideals, encouraged a vision of harmony, ruler and subject bound by duty, family and ancestor, honored in ritual. Imagine a village during Han times. The fields look much the same, the tools little changed, but beyond the horizon, caravans carry silk, spices and goods. The empire's name is carried far away, though the farmer in his field still thinks only of the next harvest, the next tax, the next meal. For peasants, dynasties rose and fell, emperors came and went, but their lives remained tied to the soil. The Han is remembered as a golden age, yet its weight too rested on the quiet strength of millions who plowed, planted, and endured. Segment 6. The Terracotta Army and Two Mysteries. Though Qin Shi Huang's dynasty ended quickly, the mark he left remains most vividly in his tomb and the Terracotta Army. To step into that world is to enter both history and mystery. Discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well, the Terracotta Army revealed itself slowly. Fragments of clay, then entire figures, until thousands of life-size soldiers stood uncovered. Each one unique, each one detailed with care. They stand in formation as if ready to march. Imagine rows upon rows of silent figures, their faces calm, their stances steady, their armor finely carved. Some hold the remains of weapons, Others bear the marks of painted colors, now long faded. Horses, too, were sculpted, complete with bridles and saddles, ready to pull chariots into an afterlife of endless vigilance. For peasants of Qin times, building this underground army was a task of immense labor. Clay had to be shaped, fired, painted, assembled. Workers labored for years, perhaps decades, under imperial command. Many may never have left the site, their lives consumed by the emperor's vision. And yet, the tomb itself remains largely unopened. Ancient texts describe rivers of mercury flowing within, mountains of bronze, and palaces built beneath the earth. Archaeologists hesitate to disturb it, fearing both the destruction of fragile artifacts and the release of toxic substances. The mystery remains sealed, slumbering beneath the earth as it has for over 2,000 years. The Terracotta Army reminds us of both ambition and fragility. Ambition in the scale of an emperor who sought to command even in death. Fragility in the knowledge that those who built it were ordinary men, whose own graves were unmarked, their names forgotten. Imagine standing at the edge of the excavation site today. The air is still, the rows of soldiers stretch before you, and silence fills the space. These clay figures outlived their emperor, outlived dynasties, outlived the very world that made them. Yet they remain calm and eternal, guardians of a vision that time has not erased. Segment 7. Confucian teachings and the exam system. As dynasties rose and fell, one philosophy became the backbone of Chinese governance and daily life: Confucianism. Its emphasis on harmony, duty, and respect shaped both the imperial court and the simplest village. For peasants, Confucian ideals often arrived not in books but in practice, in the way families honored ancestors, in the expectation that children obeyed parents, and in the sense that everyone had a place within the larger order of society. Filial piety, the duty to honor and care for one's parents, was not just a teaching, it was a lived truth, guiding choices even when life was harsh. At the state level, Confucianism formed the foundation of the imperial examination system, a method by which men could, in theory, rise from humble origins to positions of authority. To pass the exams, one needed mastery of the Confucian classics, works of philosophy, history, poetry, and ritual. Success could mean entrance into the class of scholar officials, serving the emperor directly. For peasants, the exam system offered both hope and frustration. A gifted boy from a farming family might be noticed, might be supported by relatives, might study by candlelight after long days in the fields. But the reality was that preparation required time and resources that most peasants could not spare. For everyone who rose, thousands remained bound to the soil. Imagine a young man in a village, bent over a scroll by the dim light of an oil lamp, his brush moving carefully across paper. Outside, his family works in the fields, carrying water, tending rice shoots. He dreams of passing the exams, of bringing honor to his ancestors, of leaving behind the mud and toil. For most, that dream would remain only that, yet even the possibilities shaped the culture, reminding peasants that, at least in theory, learning could open doors. The examination system endured for centuries, creating a continuity that linked one dynasty to the next. And though it rarely lifted peasants from poverty, it bound the empire together with shared ideals, ensuring that whether one lived in a mountain village or a bustling capital, the values of Confucian duty and harmony were ever present. Segment 8. Women in rural China. In the quiet villages, women carried burdens as heavy as those of men, though their roles were often unseen in official records. A woman's day began before dawn. She rose to prepare food, to tend to children, to sweep the household courtyard. She worked in the fields alongside her husband, planting and harvesting, her hands rough from labor. When not in the paddies, she spun thread, wove cloth, and managed the small details that held the household together. Marriage was central. Often arranged by families, it tied two households together. A bride left her family home to live with her husband's family, carrying with her both duties and expectations. She was measured by her ability to bear children, especially sons, who would continue the family line and honor the ancestors. Yet within these constraints, women found strength. They kept households running, cared for the elderly, and passed down traditions through stories, songs, and rituals. Their voices guided children, their labor sustained families, their resilience balanced the hardships of village life. Imagine a woman sitting in the shade at midday, weaving cloth while keeping an eye on her children playing nearby. The rhythm of the loom is steady, her movements practiced. Around her, the village hums with activity. Men in the fields, elders talking quietly, animals moving in pens. Her presence is constant, her contributions woven into every corner of daily life. Women's roles varied across regions. In some areas, they joined men in marketplaces, selling goods or weaving for income. In others, they were confined more strictly to domestic life. But always, their labor was indispensable, their endurance as essential as the men's. Though history remembers emperors and generals, the truth of rural China is that women's quiet, steady presence shaped the survival of every household. Without them, the empire could not have endured. Segment 9. Scholar officials and the privileged class. Beyond the fields and villages stood another world entirely. The refined lives of the scholar officials, men whose education lifted them above the struggles of the peasantry. Imagine a scholar official in his study. The room is quiet, its shelves lined with scrolls. The faint scent of ink fills the air. He dips a brush into a smooth inkstone, carefully shaping characters onto paper. His robes are of silk, his home furnished with carved wood and polished stone. Where a peasant's day is filled with mud, sweat, and hunger, his is filled with words, learning, and ceremony. The scholar official was both a servant of the emperor and a symbol of prestige. He oversaw taxes, administered justice, and managed the state's vast bureaucracy. His wealth came not from farming, but from stipends, land ownership, and the labor of others. Poetry and art filled his leisure. He composed verses about rivers and mountains, painted landscapes that captured ideals of harmony, and studied calligraphy not only as communication, but as an art form. Banquets brought together peers, where tea was poured, music played, and ideas debated. For peasants, this life was unimaginably distant. The scholar official might arrive in a village to oversee tax collection or resolve a dispute. His words carrying weight no farmer could question, yet he too relied on their labor, for his position was sustained by the grain they produced. This division reveals the two halves of imperial society, those who endured daily toil and those who governed with ink and brush. Both were necessary. The empire needed crops and taxes. It also needed order and record-keeping. But the gulf between the two worlds was vast, their daily rhythms as different as soil and silk. Segment 10. Peasants versus the imperial court. At the very top of society was the imperial court, a world of such luxury that it might as well have been another universe. To peasants, the emperor was the son of heaven, distant, godlike, yet ever-present through decrees and taxes. Imagine the forbidden city in later centuries, golden roofs gleaming in sunlight, walls painted in rich red, courtyards filled with officials in elaborate robes. Banquets served countless dishes, roast meats, rare spices, delicacies from across the empire. Silk garments shimmered in candlelight, music echoed from zithers and flutes, dancers moved with practiced grace. Now imagine the contrast. A peasant family sits in a mud brick home, eating plain millet with pickled vegetables, their clothing made of coarse hemp, patched and worn. Their home is warmed by a small fire, their light a single oil lamp. Where the emperor is surrounded by jade, bronze and silk, the farmer's treasures are few: a well-used plough, a jar of preserved grain, a mat to sleep on. Yet both worlds were tied together. The grandeur of the court depended on the labor of peasants, and the survival of peasants depended on the stability provided, however imperfectly, by the court. The contrast is striking. Mud and gold, silence and music, hunger and feasting. It is a reminder that within a single empire, lives could be lived so differently, bound together yet separated by immense distance. Conclusion. And now, our journey through medieval China draws to a close. We began in the villages, where peasants lived by the rhythm of fields and seasons. We faced the power of rivers, floods, and famine. We felt the weight of taxes and labor demanded by the state. We saw how Qin Shi Huang's reign reshaped the land, and how the Han Dynasty carried forward both prosperity and obligation. We descended into the mysteries of the Terracotta Army, and we reflected on the hope and frustration offered by Confucian teachings and the exam system. We stepped into the lives of women, whose labor held households together, and we contrasted the worlds of scholar officials and peasants. Finally, we looked at the emperor's court, where luxury stood in stark opposition to the toil of those who sustained it. Through it all, one truth endures. History is not only the story of emperors and palaces, but of countless ordinary people whose names were never recorded, yet whose lives made everything possible. As you rest now, you can feel the distance between their world and yours. You are not bending in muddy fields beneath the hot sun. You are not watching the river rise with fear of famine. You are not carrying grain to a tax collector or waiting for summons to imperial labor. You are safe here in the present. Take a slow breath. Imagine the quiet rustle of bamboo, the soft glow of lanterns in a village at dusk, the stars glimmering above fields at rest. The voices of the past fade into silence, leaving only calm, only stillness. The peasants of China are gone, their fields long changed, their villages dissolved into history. What remains for you now is peace. What remains is rest, and what awaits is sleep. Good night.